Welcome everyone to our first Let's Talk Parkinson's for the year. My name is Stacey Foster. I'm the Support Groups Coordinator at Parkinson's New South Wales. Joining us, we have Morel Brockett, who's the Marketing and Digital Manager at Parkinson's New South Wales. Presenting today is Rachel McKinnon, who is the Clinical Nurse Consultant at Neura, Randwick. And joining her, we have a neurology fellow, and her name is Dilara Javat. I hope I've said that correctly, Dilara. And Rachel's going to be presenting on cognition and Parkinson's disease. So welcome everyone. And I'd like to just remind you all that this is recorded, and at the end of the meeting, it will be compiled and sent out to you all as a link as well, so you can rewatch. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Rach, are you ready to go if I pass over to you? Awesome. Okay, what? Can you see the presentation?
I can see the presentation. Can everybody else? Thumbs up.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good to go. Good to go. Hey, I just want to say hello to a few familiar faces in there. Hi, Penny. Hi, Ray. Good to see you guys. So yeah, we're going to talk about cognition and what that word means and how that is affected in Parkinson's disease. And it's really good to have Dilara here on board with us as well. And I'm very happy for her to interject or make contributions as we go along, because she's very, very clever. So thumbs up to go on next slide. So I just thought I'd go back over what, and I know I'm preaching to the converted because I know that everybody knows what Parkinson's disease is, but I always like looking at it from the sort of the scientific or the pathogenic level. And so we know that it's a progressive, slow, insidious neurodegenerative disease, and that there's a loss of these dopaminergic cells. And we know that maybe 60 to 80% of these cells are lost before you even get diagnosed. And the cells are lost primarily in the substantia nigra, a small part in the brain, and then later on in basal ganglia. And these sites are, responsible for our voluntary movement, which is why we see the motor symptoms. Do you remember? I think whenever I talk to you guys, I always talk about when I was a Parkinson's disease nurse back with Florence Nightingale. And we only ever really focused on the motor symptoms of Parkinson's. But as I have grown up, and mostly with all of you, who've taught me a lot more about the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's. So we know that so things like cognition is a non-motor symptom of Parkinson's disease, and it's been measured against the progressive disease as well. So we do know that it's it's related to Parkinson's disease, and I'll explain that a bit more, in a bit. So on to the next slide. So to review, what does dopamine do? We need that for that voluntary movement. It's a neurotransmitter, but we also need it for reward, motivation, pleasure, and hugging. And we know that if we hug someone, we release dopamine. And when you have a depletion of that dopamine, it also affects other neurotransmitters in different ways. And so we think too probably that the depletion of dopamine can also contribute to the cognition impairment. And I'll still get to what I mean by cognition impairment. So there's perhaps there's a physiological reason for faster rates of cognition impairment in people with Parkinson's as opposed to people that don't have Parkinson's. Thanks, Stacey. I also want to just highlight again too the other mechanism in Parkinson's disease. And it's big, scary sounding words, but there is a role of the alpha-synuclein protein, and we know that it occurs naturally in our body. I always forget, Dilara, what it's meant to do, but we also know in Parkinson's disease that it misfolds and aggregates as clumps, and we call those Lewy body, and we can see those throughout the body. in the disease. And that also has a result in that sort of characteristic movement impairment, and probably contributes, well, it probably does contribute to cognition impairment as well. And I'll explain why I think that. So the good news is that our understanding of Parkinson's disease is constantly evolving. I've actually been so enriched by the information that I've learnt from Professor Caroline Sue here at Neura. And so we really have a much better understanding of the neural systems that are affected in Parkinson's disease. And so we know it's not just about motor. We know that the gut is involved, the autonomic nervous system is involved, sleep, smell, anxiety, and bang, cognition is also involved. Okay, and it's all in these sort of cyclic relationships. Great article, by the way. I should send it to you guys with that diagram. So what is cognition? What am I banging on here about? So cognition is really an umbrella term that describes a whole lot of things like thinking skills or mental abilities. And so what we're looking at when we're describing cognition impairment is, has there been changes to the way your attention and your concentration? Is there changes to speed of thinking, your memory and learning, and also visual functions, language skills, and executive function? And you've probably heard us at consultations talking about executive function and what that means. If we go to the next slide, it's another umbrella term that means planning and organization, problem solving, multitasking, and seeing people's different points of views, or being able to control urges or impulses. Stacey, is everybody okay? They're not looking too bewildered and going, what the heck she's talking about? Okay. So how does cognition impairment present in Parkinson's? So there is difficulty paying attention and concentrating. So things like word finding difficulties, and I'm probably worse for this, and I don't have Parkinson's, but I do describe to my kids, I say, you know, the green shop that sells anything from dog food to garbage bags that's green, and they go, yeah, Mum, that's Woolworths. So taking a while to find those right words, or difficulty following conversations or remembering names. So, you know, getting the name wrong. I do that all the time, by the way, as well. And then we use another word, Brady. Brady means slow, phrenia, so slow thinking and processing of information. And how does that impact? It impacts people on their conversations. And it's also when you've got to really concentrate and you're trying to pay attention, and you're thinking really hard, it does contribute to increased fatigue and make you tired. So there is, you know, impairment. So I remember when I was a brand new young mother, and my friend said to me, look at me now, I'm the cat in the hat, and we could multitask and throw things up in the air and do lots and lots of things. But in Parkinson's, sort of that multitasking is difficult. It is difficult to do many things at once. It's probably little driven by apathy as well, which we know is present in Parkinson's, another non-motor motor symptom. So, you know, the things that you used to enjoy, you may not enjoy as much anymore. And then difficulty tackling a task. And people tell me that when I talk to them in my consultations, they say, where once upon a time it was easy to do something, it now seems overwhelming. So this is sort of an indication of cognition impairment. I think on the next slide, it's okay, I'll come back to that as well. So when I first came up to Port Macquarie, actually, I was reading a lot of papers about cognition decline in Parkinson's. I wanted to know a lot more about it. And there was quite a lot of research and evidence that people were actually reporting cognition decline probably even 2 years up before they were diagnosed with Parkinson's. And it was often attributed to aging. So, you know, memory impairment, forgetting the right words, not being able to follow lists was attributed to, you know, simple aging. And there probably is a degree of that as well. But it was also continued to be that there was regressive decline following the disease diagnosis. And another article says that historically we haven't really consistently reported or related that to the disease progression in the past. So meaning, I guess this is my version of being working with Florence Nightingale, that we really focused on motor symptoms, on diagnosis, but we really need to start including our diagnosis of cognition impairment leading up to the disease, and then as the disease progresses, which is what we do a lot now with research, as I've discovered. Does that make sense to everybody? Delara, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So here we go, cognition impairment before the diagnosis of PD. And so there have been studies that show that people have had memory decline, attention, working memory, and difficulty with their executive function. And they've measured people that have actually gone on to have a diagnosis of Parkinson's against the general cohort, and noticed that there was faster decline in cognition in these people. And we call that higher in prodromal. It was a huge study in China. And prodromal just means running before. It's a Greek word, or before you actually get diagnosed with Parkinson's, because we know that there's quite a significant period before someone actually gets diagnosed, and cognition has been measured in these people before they get diagnosed, and it was also shown that it did correlate with motor impairment too. And so we coined the word mild cognitive impairment for Parkinson's disease. And I mentioned before that in research, there's ongoing, everything that I look at in research here is measuring cognition scores to give us ideas about the rate of progression of disease against the motor scores. So we do look at that quite more significantly now. And so there's also studies testing alpha-synuclein, or this misfolding alpha-synuclein against cognition scores. They're even recording immune responses, and this is really interesting. So there was a study that looked at increased immune responses for people that had less cognition in their, or sort of less cognition impairment in their brain, meaning that there was some healthy process to help with cognition decline. And of course, we're constantly looking at the gut microbiomes against cognition scores and measuring whether we have a healthy gut, we can have a healthy cognition, and we can perform all these tasks more easily. So what do we do? I have to just mention that in, I think it was 2019, do you remember the story how Donald Trump boasted that he scored 30 out of 30 on his mocker? I reckon he cheated, everybody. So this is a test that was designed in 1975. It's called the Montreal Cognition or Cognitive Assessment Test. Have any of you or many of you had this test done? It's a score out of 30. I wasn't going to show it to you because you're not allowed to learn it like Donald Trump. You have to be able to do it. Mind you, sometimes I forget the words when they when I ask people what 3 words or 5 words they're meant to remember. I forget them too. So anyway, it actually assesses 8 cognitive domains. Oh, I'll try. I want to see if I can speak in louder. Sorry to the person who can't hear me as well. It assesses 8 cognitive domains, and then a qualified assessor would actually be able to analyze the deficits in that test and actually sort of point to areas of the brain that there may be some cognition impairment in. The other test that we might do is called a mini mental, and it has 11 questions. Sorry, I'm slurring my words too. That's why you probably can't hear me. And tests, various mental abilities. So people have had those tests done. As their disease progresses, so maybe the geriatrician might do a test, or we might get the occupational therapist to do the test and sort of try and work out a baseline of what cognition impairment there might be, and then we can measure that as this disease progresses.